Okay, we are going to talk about how to improve your chances of passing any interpreting exam now. And this is very helpful information because sometimes passing or failing an interpreting exam is just a matter of a few points. One of the major problems with candidates that take the exam, besides the fact that they are nervous, besides the fact of whatever, other external things that happen, one of the main things that actually happens with the candidates is that they are unaware on how to score points. It's an interpreting exam. The exam is trying to prove, or you're trying to prove that you can interpret, and that's your perception of it, which is not necessarily incorrect. But the exam is just really your opportunity to score the maximum number of points in a short period of time during the duration of that particular component. So you cannot be properly prepared to pass an interpreting exam, or any exam for that matter, if you don't understand how to score the points. In your mind, scoring points is either being perfect, knowing all the terms, having a very wonderful or a wonderful intonation and all this style of delivery. But sometimes the truth of the matter is that scoring points is actually hitting the right key units. And when you take an interpreting exam, you need to know beforehand how you can score as many points as possible. Now, this is like equivalent to when you take a written test and you have 100 questions, and you begin with the questions that you know so that you can score as many points as possible in the shorter period of time. However, in an interpreting exam, you cannot do that because you have to actually score as the material is coming to you. So, for example, say that you're doing a consecutive and you're interpreting now in the consecutive. The consecutive in most interpreting exams will last around 20 minutes. As you're doing the consecutive, you know that in all these consecutives, there are a certain number of segments. You may have 10 segments or 15 segments in English and 15 segments in Spanish, or 20 in English and 20 in Spanish. The key for you will be to score as many points as necessary. Now, what does that mean, to score as many points as necessary to pass? Well, if the pass rate is 70%, you need to score that number of points, whatever 70% is. If it's 80%, you need to score that number of points. What is that 70%? What's 80%? Well, in all the exams, in all the components of your exam, there will be a maximum number of points that you can achieve at the end of the exam. And you need to score, of those maximum number of points, you need to score either a 70 or an 80%, 70 or 80% of them correctly. In your consecutive, for example, the number of points is going to be around 50. In your simultaneous, the number of points will be around 50, in some exams 40. In your sight, when it's English into Spanish, the number of points will be around 20 to 25. And in your sight, from Spanish into English, it will also be 20 to 25. So what it really means is that when you take your consecutive, that lasts 20 minutes, in a period of 20 minutes, there will be a total of 50 points. How are those points distributed? Are those points, if you have a consecutive that has 40 segments total, 20 in English, 20 in Spanish, are all of those 50 points in the first segment? And the answer is no. By proper exam practices, the number of points have to be distributed throughout those 40 segments. So what it means in terms of the exam itself is that you're not going to be able to get to, let's say, 70% of 50, 35 in the first 4 or 5 segments. You may need more segments. But when I say that the whole idea is to score the maximum number of points, the idea is to score the necessary number of points to pass the exam as soon as possible. What I'm referring to is score them as soon as you have you were exposed to that number of points. So if there are 40 segments, maybe by segment 29, if you did everything right, you already have the 70%. Now, it's important that you always try to score them as soon as possible for the following reason. It has been shown that students or candidates tend to perform better in long exams, like in the consecutive, that is 20 minutes, tend to perform better at the beginning than at the end. So it's important that we use that data to actually try to score as many points as possible. And when a new component comes in, let's say simultaneous, the same thing is true. Now, there are some candidates that don't do well at the very beginning of the exam, not the very beginning of the component. So if the exam begins with consecutive, maybe the first 4 or 5 segments you're weak, but then you should be able to recover and score and do fairly well. But in general, if given the opportunity, you should try to score them as soon as possible. What does it mean to you? It means that you need to be really ready for the exam from the moment that it begins for that particular component. If you cannot, if you make mistakes at the beginning, you still have time or sufficient points available to reach that 70%. But what are these points? Because it's important to know, what do you mean by a point? Well, imagine that I create an exam for you, and that we all of us create an exam together, and on this page I can put my whole consecutive, where I have one segment, another segment, another segment. So if you will have all 40 segments or so. In one of, do I have to have at least 1 point in each of the segments? That's the first question that you want to know. Because if you have 40 segments and there is a total of 50 points, common sense will say that each segment will have at least 1 point. The answer is not. That's not true. There could be questions with 0 points, and there could be answers with 0 points. But in general, the rule of designing exams indicate that the number of points have to be evenly distributed throughout the duration of that component. So you can say that on average basis, or you can go to the exam thinking that for each particular segment, you're going to have at least 1 point that you need to score. So it may or may not be true, but at least 1 point. Let's say that you have 40 segments in the consecutive, and there are 50 points. Clearly, there will be segments where there will be 2 points. Not too many, but there will be some segments where there will be 2 points. Okay, that's important, because I don't want you to expect, particularly in the simultaneous, I don't want you to think that all the points are accumulated at the end, in the middle, or at the beginning. It's evenly distributed. Now, next question. What is a point? Okay, is a point a word? It's a point a sentence? It's a point a factual information? Is a point a description? And if it is a description, is it just one item of that description or the whole description of an individual? And that's what we want to talk about today.